For now, I would like to welcome you all in this special event, this special occasion. I think you are all connoisseurs, and I'm happy that we have such a marvelous crowd of real people who really are into the subject of data collecting and data visualization, and we hope we have a very nice discussion. I welcome you as the director of Studium Generale, as a member of the TV community, but also I welcome you as part of a team that organizes the Friday afternoon lecture. The Friday afternoon lecture is an idea that was based on the philosophy of Gilles Holst, who said that it was excellent if professionals had the opportunity to experiment on a Friday afternoon, experiment with arts, with science, and combinations between the two of them, because from that marvelous innovations could arise. So that's very much the idea of this afternoon. That's also the reason why we ask a person who is conscious of both the developments in arts and in social science and in engineering. And we are very happy that Sara Diamond from the Ontario College of Art and Design was able to come to the Netherlands, and she has a tremendous jet lag, but I'm sure she will be very much looking forward to giving her presentation about data representation, and she will tell all about the very intriguing fact that data can play in our society and the way we can deal with them. She already had some conversations with people from mathematics and from industrial design, and it led to a very good cross-fertilization so far. And here with this audience, I'm sure that you will be able to raise your questions and to discuss things with her. But first of all, give her a nice round of applause. Sara Diamond.
So first I'm going to test and make sure that the microphone is working.
It's working.
It's working. Yes. Yay, that's terrific. So thank you so much. It's really an incredible pleasure to be here, and I want to thank Cohen for his fantastic organizational efforts to get me to the Netherlands, to Eindhoven. And I'm going to start by talking a little bit about my history and my interest and fascination with this field. So I'm a data visualization artist, designer, and scientist. I'm really compelled by the struggle to make the invisible visible and to understand all of the challenges and mediations within that process. So whether it's mobile phone traffic, gene sequencing, or internet transactions, we need to harvest, in fact we are harvesting incredible amounts of data. And we need to be able to visualize the flow of that data and to see and understand our world through that process. And this is a great example. This is a visualization of Chrome and its history and the ways that the various technologies contributed to it and its growth as an environment, of course, a sort of search environment in which many of us live and represent our data. And I love this image. It is maybe a very nostalgic image once you know its context. So it's the day of President Obama's inauguration, the first inauguration, when the romance with that president was arcing in the United States. And these are the people who are assembled at the inauguration, and it's all of their mobile phone traffic, both the intensity of the time leading up to the inauguration itself, and then all of the communication, the texting, etc. This is pre-Twitter, if you remember thinking back a little bit. Both in the district, the people in and around there, out to the United States and then out to the world. So it measures that, and it's an amazing snapshot of a moment. And the visualization aesthetics I find in this are particularly strong, because you have this sort of patterns of the flow of data, the use of color in order to give you that sense of excitement and the growing of an event, and then it's kind of fading away. And none of the text, you could add the text here, and text is always really an important tool with visual analytics and data visualization, because as with any image, it kind of fixes that image and gives it meaning and allows you to have context, but I think it's still a very eloquent snapshot. So I'm personally quite data challenged. I updated this a little bit for this presentation, and I currently have 2,035 Twitter followers. That's not that many, but it's still a reasonable number. Facebook friends. I decided to cut off my Facebook friendship about 6 months ago, but you know, if you want to be a friend, let me know and I'll remember you from Eindhoven. LinkedIn connections, currently 28, almost 3,000. And my inbox, so I've had this resolution, which was my New Year's resolution, and I've been following it. So my inbox used to have about 14,000 emails in it, and that was just current, and then there was all the backup, and I cleaned it out. So this is a revelation, but that data is all, you know, it's all backed up, it's saved, so there's just thousands and thousands of emails. My health card, hundreds of x-rays, 3 MRIs that I've had in my life, driver's license, parking tickets. I currently have 8 credit cards. At a point in my life, I was actually collecting credit cards to see how much virtual credit I could get, and it was one of my little art projects, and I trashed a lot of them. So I've kept 8 of them. You know, you always have to have a backup plan. 2 bank cards, 20 loyalty cards, 28 passwords, 130 Google entries, and 27 page, 10,000 of text messages, thousands of photographs, I mean, a gigabyte of photographs, GPS addresses. It's just the tip of my personal iceberg in terms of my data. So there you go, swimming around it, and it just keeps building and building and building. And so I know perhaps people in this room are very involved in data analytics. Maybe that's why you came to this talk. But even if you are, I just want you to think about your own personal data context, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But just to count the data sources in this room. And my university, which is the Ontario College of Art and Design University, and we call ourselves the University of the Imagination. In any case, we're working increasingly in the space of what Cisco calls the Internet of Everything, you know, historically the Internet of Things. And so in this phenomenally connected universe, we just are producing so much data. I was recently at a dinner where we were debating what is big data, and people who were, I think, more kind of classical scientists in the space were saying, well, it's only, you know, genomics. It's only all of the airline traffic in real time, and historically that's been happening. It's only huge files. But I think if you look at all of the unstructured data that we collect as individuals, and if you accrue all of that, I mean, that becomes, all those layers contribute to big data. So we live, in a sense, in a parallel universe, you know, one of constant classification, where our data is segmented, and it's one of fantastic opportunity or not. And I'm not talking so much about the ethics of data in this talk, although we could certainly have that conversation, and I may show you some things today that make you very uncomfortable in terms of ethics. But it's something I think that bubbles around us constantly about, you know, what are appropriate uses of that data, issues around privacy, etc., which I will come to a little bit in this. So I think one of my themes is I feel that it's time that we drew a kind of personal data portrait of ourselves. I think of it as a sort of 21st century tattoo. And I think it's important for all of us to be able to have that portrait, to understand our data in an aggregated way, to pull those sources together, and to be able to visualize or sonify or touch whatever medium allows us to have a sense of our identities, and then to be able to navigate and edit and control, and for our relationships of privacy and the boundaries we want to put around that portrait to be something that we have as a set of literacies, and something that we certainly need to give to younger people. And you know, we're in a world where the kind of gateways to being able to access or not access your data, whether it's to Facebook or other environments in which we navigate, are extremely limited. You're sort of in or you're out. And unless you're a sophisticated user, or unless you can opt out in sophisticated ways and create boundaries around yourself, then you don't have access to the world, to the things that you need, if you don't, in a sense, share your data. So having a sense of, I think this is a right, actually, in the 21st century, and we need to do a lot of work to be able to create these kinds of profiles and to have the literacy and the tools to sort of manage that world. Yeah, so so my data entanglement, so I want to step back a little bit from that kind of pressing need, and I think I'll give you some examples as I walk through this presentation about ways of both building analytic systems but also visualizations that attempt to come back to this solution or this problem of personalization, or at least reflect on it. So my data entanglement, so this is a little bit of my personal biography and why I ended up in this world, because it's a world that as an artist and a designer one might not naturally move towards. I began to draw with data when I was an art student, which was quite a few years ago. And I became really fascinated by human patterns and how people moved through spaces, both urban and constrained spaces. And I would draw, and I would count, and I would aggregate and kind of redraw these movements and activities around me and draw these maps of data. This was before people really did this much. So one of my projects was I installed myself in this big hallway in the university that I was attending, and I became completely fascinated with the ways that bathroom patterns were gendered. So how male students and other people in the university would move to the male bathrooms, and how females would move to the female, and how dwell time at each bathroom, and women definitely spent more time in the bathroom. And then I actually installed myself in the women's bathroom to be able to see what the patterns of use, mirrors, etc., in and out of the various cubicles. I had a friend of mine do some data collection in the men's bathroom. I wasn't bold enough to dress up and go in there. And then I created these artworks, which were really about patterning and the ways that, in very interestingly gendered ways, people use the washroom. So, so that was my first sort of foray. And I'm jumping ahead to drawing with data, but there was a big step after that, which was I also, my first academic training really was as a social historian. And I collected oral histories from people. And at that time, there weren't tools for natural language processing that were available. I mean, we are going back a few decades here. But I would actually read all these masses of transcripts, and I try and pull out keywords and understand why people were motivated to do certain things in terms of, in this instance, activism and the transformation and the creation of organizations. And then I was interested in longitudinal research and patterns to see how, if I could aggregate these large data sets of activities and communities, what things I could find that were common and what things that were outliers there. So I was doing all of this with creating, hand-drawn databases, pulling all of this stuff together. So that was my kind of historian life. I wasn't drawing from this. I was graphing, maybe in very rudimentary ways. And then in 1996, I became really fascinated with how people talk to each other online. So I spent a lot of time in online chat worlds. I was very interested in this. I was at the Banff Center. I started the Banff New Media Institute. We were working with Microsoft and IRC companies. And I was spending a lot of time in online discussion groups. And I was completely obsessed with how people talk to each other online and how to try and make those conversations more meaningful. And over many years, it became a 9-year project, essentially, and then I actually went back, reverse engineered some of the work I'm going to show you, did a PhD in computer science and electrical engineering. I decided that I would build an online conversational tool that would allow us to visualize chat on a topical basis. So you have to picture this, like this is the world before Twitter, it's the world before the explosion of social media, blogs don't exist yet. So I'm trying to figure this out as an artist, And I wanted to be able to visualize chat by topic, draw related subjects, and bring them close to each other, so kind of aggregate them in a physical way in space, and then analyze emotion. So, you know, I was interested in affective computing and what has become sentiment analysis, to be able to refine the tone of online dialogue. And if you're interested in a deep dive into the project, those are the two websites that you can look at. You can read my PhD for you. No, it's pretty. It's got lots of images. And it also has all of the work that I did leading up to this project. And this project was not only motivated by this fascination with how people chatted online, but I was bringing together scientists and artists and designers, science fiction writers, to this kind of cauldron I'd created at the Banff Center of facilitated discussion around the relationship between science and engineering, computer science, and these other creative fields, and trying to vision what the world could be. So it was kind of like a foresight institute that I was running, and I wanted an online tool that was really beautiful and engaging to get people to talk to each other and sort of continue those dialogues. So I built this software. It was a means to facilitate moderated brainstorming in real time or in asynchronous processes in online conversation. It was also a synchronous chat tool for live events. So in the days that I was really using it and building it, if we were having this discussion now, you'd all be sitting there on CodeZebra chatting away, and we'd be running it and projecting it. It was also functioned as an archive of conversation that could be analyzed, essentially using various kinds of computational linguistic tools to draw out patterns. And then also the whole idea was to create play and to promote a different kind of conversation and interdisciplinary engagement. And I just want to say that just as a bit of a footnote, and maybe we'll come back to this a little bit if we manage to get into a conversation about aesthetics and how artists are working in this space, and also how I think a lot about visualization. I think about it in terms of narrativity for sure, and metaphors, and I'll show a bit of this, but I also think it's very much linked to a history of abstraction. So, you know, abstraction in painting was very much inspired, and still is, by a sort of structuralist relationship with geometry and space and human scale in relationship to those, but very much about abstraction. And of course, those of you in the data space, forgive me for saying what you know, but it's mathematical, it's a measurement of processes. But what I'm about to say here is that it's not the process itself. Anything can be measured and expressed in data, and I think engineers have that habit of saying anything can be measured, anything can be quantified. Well, I have some agreement with that, but certainly phenomena can be measured and expressed as data. And I think the words I say there about it being not the process itself, I guess I just want to underscore that a million times over, which is that you know, data are representational. They are not the thing in itself, and this gets into philosophy and phenomenology, but they are already an extraction and an abstraction. And so by the time you get to a visualization, you're dealing with a number of levels of mediation there, and choices that are made along the way, even in an automatic environment, and then a human analyst at the other end. So one of the mistakes that gets made sometimes is this kind of conflation of data with the phenomena that it's representing. So I hope that's not too abstract, and we can come back to that. But some of that informed my early work, and it informs a lot of what I do now. And I've thrown in some great visualizations as we move along. So designing the city at night, Barcelona. So this is a combination of 3 data sets, and it's social media from Barcelona, and it's open data that's being analyzed, and then it's also light, so light spill, and then it takes the map of Barcelona and kind of lays out those intensities over that map, and then you begin to get the sense of, you know, what's the activities of the city. Lots of work these days in visualization in the urban context, lots of exciting work that allows you to understand, you know, what is the usage of a city, what's the human activity within that usage, etc. So just to give you this sense of abstraction, do check out this visualization and the work behind it. It's very interesting. posting. So coming back to my stuff, so these are early sketches. I was very interested in both how people chatted. I was interested in how social networks were drawn. In other words, you know, how much activity was there between you know, those two people, what was the flow of that activity, how were people engaged in this space. I had this obsession with Voronoi sets, which I'll talk about in a minute. So in any case, I built a neural network, and it assigned emotional qualities to individual postings within topical groups, so within sort of subjects. And the emotional qualities of the topics were then averaged, and you would get this sort of background. And the idea was, because I was really already concerned with the amount of flaming that was happening in online discussion groups, the amount of irrelevant dialogue, you know, lurking, all of the problematic qualities of that space, but also how fantastic it was if you could get a really engaged and powerful dialogue underway. So, so I wanted a system where you could choose to enter a dialogue because of its subject matter. You wanted to talk about this or that, but also because of its affective quality. So if you wanted to have a really, really big fight with people, you could identify that this was like a fighting space and people were really duking it out over a topic. Or if you wanted to talk about something that was, you know, so if you wanted to fight about, you know, I don't know, cat breeding or something, you could go in there and you could have that fight. But if you wanted to talk about, you know, how calming your cats were as pets, you could be in a space that was really, had this other kind of effective quality. So anyhow, over the years I built a number of prototypes, and they grouped conversations, and they used this sort of Voronoi type environment which used edges, and then as the conversations would intensify, the actual environment itself would move and shift like a very kind of natural environment. I built 4 sets of prototypes. Each of them used patterning to represent an emotional quality in a posting, and then I took the text and subject matter out of here just so you could get a sort of sense of the feel of, you know, what the environment looked like. And each of these would be postings. You could zoom in on them and you would get the content. I also used dance and theater improvisation to try and imagine the look and feel and navigation of the software. And then one of the outcomes of that was I actually ended up working with choreographers and myself choreographing dance performances and also spoken word events that were built from the backstories of each of the patterns. So the patterns had an identity, and that identity had a character, and the character had a set of movements and also stories that could be told. So this is a really goofy picture of us kind of dressed up in this patterning system and getting ready to do our improvisation. It's a lot of fun. And we also, you know, we worked with a group of engineers who helped us to build this stuff. And as we improvised, got deeper and deeper into the process, the engineers actually had a lot of fun also being part of the improvisation. And so the animal characters within the patterning system, because I wanted to create this kind of jungle of a world, also appeared as species with stories and histories. So postings in the software were laid out in a lateral pattern with a network diagram that showed their order. And I wanted to try and break up the kind of hierarchical ordering of linear IRC chat and instead have this organic living feel, but also look at the ways that there were connections across the pattern. So this sort of gives you a zoom out of the different subject. This is the code zebra alive and chatting. It gives you a sense of the kind of affective quality of these different topics. You could zoom over and you'd figure out what the subject area was, and then you could click on any one of the postings and you would be able to get a sense of what the content was. And then along the bottom here, there is the ability to zoom in and out, and also to move into a game space, which I'll talk about in a moment. It offered little games that were embedded in the chat site, and if you were bored, you could grab a posting and you could sculpt it, and if you were antagonistic, you could challenge a conversationalist to a duel. So I was really interested in these ways of working with the data of conversation and representing it and its relationships in different kinds of ways, but also really thinking about how to play with that data, how to turn it into something else. So this is the little sculpting tool that we made, where you could import a text and you could play with it, you could scrunch it, you could have an aggressive mode or a kind of sexy mode that undulated, or you can destroy it and then rebuild it. We had just a little butterfly fridge posting game that we made, where you could pull out terms and you could reorder them and repost them. So this idea of sort of, I guess, data mashup in various sorts of ways. So at the Dutch Electronic Arts Festival in 2003 in Rotterdam, I locked up pairs of artists and scientists together for 24 hours. They weren't allowed to escape. They had to sign a release form saying they wouldn't try and escape. And I asked them to create new inventions and theories, and they streamed out to the world and used Code Zebra to communicate and debate with me and specialist moderators, as well as to invent. And they came up with really fantastic inventions, and it was a very successful experiment in some ways. This is, again, a little bit before reality television, so I think I had something there that would have been great to commercialize. But in any case, they had a lot of fun, and it was also fabulous because it built this huge archive of chat of people who engaged with them, and all these diagrams of the kind of patterns of emotion over 24-hour periods. And then I also created software. So this is my venture into wearable technology, and it's a space that my school is very, very much engaged in, is looking at wearables both for health, for fashion, for play. So these were fashion works that could correspond and respond to the Code Zebra operating system. So, for example, they could through movement broadcast a graphic, so it would actually run through the software and choose a graphic, and you could get through people's engagement with the chat and their interaction with the dancers, you would develop this base of data that then could flow up and become an image that was projected or would be shown in some kind of changing quality of the costumes that people were wearing and the clothing that people were wearing. And one of the goals, and this sort of comes back to where I started about this need to have this sort of personal representation of your data, one of my goals in this experiment was to draw a sort of personal tattoo for each user that they could own, they could edit, they could skin it, they could display it, and it could have a history of their feelings in the online world, as well as storing their data with visual links. And it could be visual, playable, navigable, it could be tactile. I had this idea of actually printing these little fabric displays that were unique for each user. 3D printing wasn't quite around at the time yet. This was one of the very early mock-ups of this idea. So it was kind of like a tree ring. It has this great kind of Celtic tattoo feel to it. So the layers, you know, the infinite layers of your identity could be contracted or expanded. And then we had this sort of 3D idea that almost sort of penetrating this space. For a while we were trying to build Code Zebra OS as a 3D software space, and realized that what we were trying to do computationally was like hard enough without adding that layer to it, and in any ways it wasn't really meaningful. So that was this project. It was a big project, and it led me, you know, back to this idea that we produce a massive data, and this notion of a personal data profile, that we really need to be conscious of what is made up in that, how it's aggregated, and the value of the data. So I'm continuing to work on the creation of individual network data portraits. As I said, 21st century tattoos, and there's some early interesting work, you know, going back and forth. Flauser, which showed what people were aggregating in the Amazon environment, and sort of pulled that together. So that's an idea of sort of a media tattoo or representation. I continue to work in that space right now. We have a very close partnership with the Globe and Mail, which is Canada's largest newspaper, and we have a lot of different work that we do. I should mention that I lead the visual analytics lab at Oak Head University. It's my research practice as well as being the president. And it's a large lab. The lab has a philosophy where we only work with actual data and actual users. So we don't just pull a data set to kind of play around with it, although we certainly support that as part of the learning process and research and ways of working towards an actual problem. So we work with real clients and actual data sets. And one of the things that we've proposed to the Globe and Mail is to take this thinking, that I was involved with many years ago, and to work with them and with their subscribers, because they've moved into the subscription environment, as one of the reasons for an individual to become a subscriber is that this media entity would provide you with this personal data profile that would be located and based in the Globe and Mail, but would push you out to all of your kind of Twitter world and your other social media worlds, and also could potentially have your other kinds of data relationships embedded in and around it. So it's an ambitious idea. We're trying to think about what the parameters are. And they have the data analytics and excavation capacity. They've got a very sophisticated data analytics team to actually make this happen. So we're just in the process of looking at that. They're very interested in it because it's something, as I said, to give their subscribers, but it also means that for their really sophisticated subscribers, they can become sort of models or forerunners, guides to the world of the Globe and Mail and all that connected tissue for other individuals. So if you go back to my Code Zebra ideas, it was, yes, you would have your personal profile. You could choose whether or not to let other people navigate that profile. So you could share components of your identity with others, and you could also block others from being able to be in this space. So as I just said, we're interested in this notion of individual profiles. I'm also very interested, if you go back to the Code Zebra work, in the problem of navigating data space, how to make that meaningful, rich, engaged. And I'm also really interested, as are my research assistants, in how to think about navigation as something that happens in very different ways in the online world than, for example, in traditional media. So this is just an example that one of our RAs, Simon, sort of mocked up of thinking of the Globe and Mail as a topography that's navigable. So this is the paper, and this notion that every day you'd have, and we're also working with effective computing. We did a huge project around sentiment analysis of the paper and effective analysis of different sections. I'm going to show you a little bit of that. But in this instance, it's a sort of topographical representation where you could sort of navigate through and have this sense of the topography of the depth of each of the columns or articles, and then a way of indicating what its sort of affective color quality was for that particular, the height or the peak of that section. So just again to come back to this notion of the world as data, where are you recorded? Where are you recording? How can you access your data? What data do you want to share? And how would your tattoo look, sound, and feel? This is another project from my lab. This was a lot of fun. This was thinking about working with, again, the Globe and Mail. And then we also work with a data analytics firm that does back engine stuff. We were thinking about sort of representing the urban environment through the built space of the different columns and the qualities of those columns, and thinking about neighborhoods and the scale of those relative to others within the publication. And to be able to use this metaphor of architecture in the built space to understand how you would navigate data. So I guess one of my pleas are, and again, I'm probably singing to the choir here, but the need for data literacy. And I think for those of us who actually work in the field of data analytics or visual analytics or data visualization, we have to be the people who go out and proselytize about how important data literacy is. If we're building systems that analyze other people's data, it cannot be a black box. It has to be, I think we have a fundamental responsibility to help individuals to become aware of where their data is and how it's stored and accessed and by whom. So I'm always encouraging people, even advanced users, to use Many Eyes. How many people know about Many Eyes? Okay, yeah, so that's interesting. So some of you do. So Many Eyes is an environment that now resides with IBM, and it is essentially a social media space. That's how it was intended, to allow you to bring in a data set, filter that data set into graphical form. So it helps you figure out like what's the appropriate structure and potential graphing strategy for it. So it does all that work, and then provides you with a metaphor, appropriate metaphor, a limited set of metaphors with which to represent the data. But it's quite amazing for people for the first time when they actually take a data set and march it through this process, and they realize, you know, that this is what a visualization is. This is how their data actually translates into something that can be analyzed and understood. And so through that process, you can learn a lot about yourself, your community, and I always ask people to think about how you would design your own data profile and what metaphors you would use for that. So it's just an image of many eyes. And I want to talk now a little bit more in some general terms about data visualization, and then to take you through some of the additional work that's almost an extension of those early preoccupations. So data visualization requires awareness of the cognitive aspects of human visual apprehension, such as color theory. It also requires a sense of eye-hand coordination, how the brain works. And I think all of that has to happen within a contextual analysis, and there's lots of debates within cognitive science about, you know, what you can generalize and what you can't. And for example, this morning we were just chatting about color theory, and you know, how there is color theory about perception, but there's also color theory that's highly cultural, and it's framed by culture. So one set of colors means one thing in a North American or European context, it means something very different in Asia, and you need to have those kinds of awarenesses. We need very strong grounding in aesthetics theory. In other words, how the language of form works, and how people respond to different kinds of formal strategies, how we understand metaphor, how we interpret, and also, as I said, the sense of the user's context. And the debate about you know, generic tools versus tools that are specific, how much you can personalize tools within the visual analytic space, is a very vibrant, living debate right now, and it requires these different kinds of knowledges to come together. So one of the things that, again, I like to argue, and it kind of goes back to some of my earlier statements about how data themselves are mediated, and mediations, visualizations carry with them the assumptions and aesthetics of their contributing technologies. So they absorb the aesthetics of two-dimensional and 3D graphic systems and animation systems, and all of these have formal styles and malleability. And so we need to understand, when we're looking at these representations, that there's a whole lot of language compounded into that image. And I think that's really exciting and really interesting when we think forward. So this is just a couple of examples here of mediated visualizations, and these are flow tornado sets, and they're actually very, very beautiful, and they have this sort of relationship to the photographic image, and they kind of come from photography, and there's a very strong relationship between using photographic technologies and then data visualization laid on top of those. This is again using you know, photographic imagery as a sort of base, and then looking at data that's then layered on top of that, drawn on top of that. And what I love in some ways that artists bring is the sense that there's a kind of experimental and critical edge to data visualization that can prompt different kinds of insights and reflection. And those are not always common to other ways of working with data visualization. So this is a really wonderful work that I think endures over the years. And again, if you want to look it up, it has a very strong web presence. And it's entitled Stock Market Planetarium. And it's a very eloquent artwork. It was built to live next door to the London Stock Exchange. It then was commissioned by the Tate Modern, and it lived there for a while. It's had various kinds of presentations. and it was a planetarium where the planets were made up of corporations reorganized into a kind of planetary network that was both kind of very cosmological, but also almost astrological as well. And then there were little artificial life creatures that lived within this world, and they were fed through real-time data, so big data pouring in from the stock markets and their transactions. And the little creatures would develop as artificial, so BT was very involved in building this, so they helped with the AL work, and the little creatures would morph and grow and change, and they would be able to eat away at or reform these planets that lived in the space. So you would actually have the sense of what was happening within the stock market, the London stock market. And brokers would come in, and there actually was a debate about whether they should have screens and the ability to actually move your stocks in one direction or another, watching the planetarium, and there was a decision not to do that because there were some ethical concerns. And then the artists were actually asked if they wanted to commercialize this work because it was such a beautiful way of kind of managing the visualization of the London Stock Exchange. So, but it was done with a great sense of irony, you know, in a way they were very interested in how many representations that used cosmology were beginning to show up within data visualization and why that metaphor was so present. And they were also very interested in the ways, of course, that, you know, we live in a virtual world that's very much driven by what had happened in the stock market. 2002, they started to build this right after the crash, you know, of the high-tech world, crash number one. And it actually lived through one of the sort of Black Fridays in the British economy, when half the artificial life creatures died and a lot of the planets fell away, and then they reformed and began to feed on each other. So it was kind of an interesting predictive model, but I really like it as an example of how artists can, in a sense, represent a different kind of space. And then I just included this. This is a colleague of mine I worked with a lot who works in nanotechnology, and he's doing a lot of work with blood plasma and the nano world, and the ability to, in a sense, float free from some of the more traditional ways of using visualization, because he's using animation to try and represent actual data coming from that world, but in ways that you know, has this incredibly powerful sort of visual quality to it. So there's a whole debate about the role of the artist or the designer within the space, and, you know, should we use very simple graphical forms that are that have very little cognitive load for visualization, versus those of us who would say, yes, in some contexts that makes sense, but essentially you're always producing something that is mediated by human agency, from the decision around, you know, which data sets to use, right through to some of the ways that algorithms are focused on particular kinds of questions and structures, right through to the ways that you would create a graph and which graphical form you're going to use if there's choices, through the visualization. So there's a sort of attachment and anxiety sometimes about the designer's hand within visualization that I think we need to let go of, because in fact all scientific instruments are conditioned by their context. The observer, one could argue, is always present in some ways, and it's better to kind of recognize that subjectivity in a sense and really use it. And these are just a number of examples of packet movement through the internet by artists that I thought were really interesting, because they're very different sorts of representations of the same activity. Julian Oliver's work, this is an older piece, allows you to actually garden with your packets. So you can choose which kind of flowers they will grow, and you can move your packets around to build a garden. And as I mentioned also, there's a debate, and I think it's dropping to some extent, but there's a debate about whether effective engagement on the part of the user leads to a loss of objectivity. In other words, is there a problem if data is beautiful? Does it pull us away or push us into the visualization to such an extent that we lose our minds? And it's an interesting, there's a lot of writing about hysteria during the Renaissance era, when there was such beautiful, the Sistine Chapel and all this beautiful artwork, and people would faint, you know, at the beauty and kind of lose control of themselves. And I think this sort of fear of data beautiful is an interesting kind of connection with that era. So Lev Manovich, who's a very interesting theorist and is now has since dived feet forward into making visual analytic pieces using media, was one of the artists who was really beginning to play with data. So the reason I just represented all of these is they're just very different aesthetics, but dealing with the same kind of data sets, but in very different ways. So I think artists and designers, that our job is not to just beautify, but we need to be in the process from the beginning, that we can provide new expressions that divulge very new perspectives on data. We discover missing data when we're there. We think in different ways. We think very visually. We ask unusual questions. And we also can question the source and structure of the data. So I want to, in the next little while, take you through the last few of the projects from the last 3 years of my lab, and some of what we're looking at as we're working with different kinds of data sets and user groups. So this is a project, I mentioned we work a lot with the Globe and Mail. They're the largest national newspaper in Canada. They've gone completely digital in the last period of time. And we were very interested in a whole series of questions with them. Right now we're doing some work looking at their supply chain and the relationship between their physical, the people who use the physical paper, their digital users, what it takes to get that physical edition out to a very big country, much bigger than the Netherlands, and where their subscribers are, and to try and understand that market to help them make decisions. So we're doing a lot of mapping, visualization, and other visualization for them in that space. And we're also doing a big piece of work in understanding their subscription environment and the behaviors of their subscribers, and trying to really find ways of representing that. And as I said, also looking at how to build personal profiles for those people. So this is somewhat earlier work. This is work that had two tiers. One was to extract and visualize emotions, to understand relationships and influential users in the digital space and also in online social media, and then also to really try and understand how do people navigate within the digital space. So this is work that we were doing, and we were looking at various visualizations that we thought were really compelling ways of representing data, looking at different kinds of graphical representations within the same space. And then trying to understand really in a more sort of, with more clarity, the ways that mapping and movement through maps could occur. And finding examples, I don't know if people have seen TextArc, but it's a really beautiful visualization system that Brad Paley built, and it provides a great kind of centrifuge to be able to put entire text through it and pull out keywords. So there's NLP within it for the sort of keyword processing, but then to understand how ideas and themes are clustered within a sort of digital space. So and we feel fine. Again, another very interesting piece of work, a somewhat older piece of work by Harris and Kamvar, in which they're looking at human emotions within blogs, and they're using certain thematics and times like Valentine's Day. They also did a big search. My favorite of theirs is looking for blogs where people break up with each other, and they're visualizing the process of kind of breaking up and what people say, and then the kind of affective placement of those various kinds of breakups in the online space again. So we were very interested in finding a kind of grounding in philosophy that could help us to understand this sort of process of practice and presence within the online world, coming in some ways out of my own work in the past, but also interest within our research group. And we were looking at Michel Foucault's ideas of discursive formations and Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari's work on the rhizome. And these pieces really kind of are about putting discursive formations in place, so looking at what is it that brings a topic together in various ways. Where is it found? How do you pull that into something that's meaningful? What are the connections between topics? What are the kind of natural flows? And so we tried to develop a framework to restructure current online news formats in ways that would allow online news to be deconstructed and recontextualized, to allow digressive and kind of profound association to happen between news and articles. And we wanted to move online news beyond its current very linear structure, which is really a sort of search structure, like here's the article and here's the related article. And what we saw in observing online readers' practices is that they jumped around a lot more, that it wasn't just about, well, yeah, they'd use search and association if that's all you gave them, but if they actually were given time within the online space, they had their own paths, their own associations that were meaningful. And what we were really interested in doing is to create a more sort of discursive visualization method for our readers to be able to think things through. So this is just the example of Foucault's discursive formation. You can see how there's different kinds of assignments of topics and how you kind of think through relationships. And then the notion of the rhizome is that you have repetitions that kind of pop up in different places. So we were really interested in those ways of thinking about navigation. And this piece is called Cell Chamber, and it works with the idea of news articles which are represented as a single node, and nodes are understood as cells for each article, and they're kind of organic assemblage of concepts, interviews, imagery, and captions, and you put those components together and they compose the entire story. So we're kind of pulling the stories themselves apart and looking at how one could navigate through the sort of substructure of an online environment here. And it provides an overall view of the article network, or offers the user a single article as a kind of starting point, which expands to more related articles as the user navigates based on the relationship alone. So when you click on a cell, it expands into secondary rings that surround the article. And the smaller rings, I should go back here, signify each sentence in the article and how it adds to the overall emotion of that article. Any of the rings will show you the metadata from the article, such as writing, location, connections, geospatial information, keywords, and emotional score of the article. Because remember, we're putting it through this sort of affective computational engine that we built. And then you can see how articles connect over time, and you get you provide the user with a view of how the stories or trends unfold. So I'll just take you through a little bit of this. And then this was really fun. So this was, pushing it even further to say, how can we take something that is this almost three-dimensional cellular structure that has relationships that can be drilled into, and then think about that as a representation of the week and the relationships within that week, the connections, as I mentioned, between stories, authors, concepts, and then emotion as it played out within that week with a sort of dominant emotion. And then just flipping it on its side, so you get this sense of this giant squid of a newspaper that's sort of flying through data space. So our partners, the Globe and Mail, really love this. They didn't necessarily think it was something that could substitute for their navigation strategies, but they were very interested in it as a representation and in a tool that could show the kind of affective quality within the publication, and also as something that they wanted to project when you walked into their building, that you'd get this real-time feed of this beautiful creature that represented the Globe and Mail. Just different sort of representations and sketches here, and we were given data sets, large-scale data sets of text, and that we were working with as well. So this is fun. I thought you'd like this here because you love soccer, and I know the Dutch are very well behaved around your sports, but in Canada we like to have riots when we have hockey games and the team loses that we were all rooting for. So this is from the very infamous, in Canada alone, hockey riot that happened. And this is another affective treatment of columns within the newspaper. So it's taking each column and being able to analyze the articles within it, give them, again, a color-based reading. And I know there's a lot of challenges with using color for visualization, but this, let alone color blindness, which is one. But here is a color reading, and then you could choose an article, and you would get this sort of keyword analysis that would tell you which were the words that were used to give that affective reading. So we wanted to always, within this, provide a sort of deconstructive lens, which let the viewer understand what was in the black box behind the visualization, how we were coming up with an analysis. So you wouldn't take that for granted. You could challenge it if you wanted to. And just various views of that. So I think, how much time do I have left? About 5? Yeah. Okay, good. So the other space that we've really moved into in a really kind of enthusiastic way is big data and health. And we're doing a lot of work in the space of personal mobile care and prevention. This is really just an argument for why this is such an incredibly important and growing space. And 2 projects very quickly I want to talk about. So one is Biodiaspora, which is a project that brings together a lot of interdisciplinary capacity and now has added design thinking and design capacity to it. So we're one of their major collaborators now going forward. And essentially they have, to date, provide strategic preparedness for governments, a lot of work with governments, also for airlines, for corporations, for large entities that use data from global air travel patterns and global infectious disease surveillance to help to create risk stratification. So they worked, for example, with the London Olympics, and then also to prepare emergency response. So Kamran Khan, who is the lead organizer, the lead guy who's come up with Biodiaspora. He's a clinical researcher in epidemiology, and he's also a really brilliant guy in terms of bioinformatics. And just a little bit of images from the work as I talk about it. But what we're doing, which is interesting, I think, is we're working now with him to build a personal infectious disease visualization tool that's on a mobile device and allows, and this is something that, you know, either paranoids or people who actually travel a lot and are in business travel, etc., will use. So it kind of provides you with your profile and then gives you real-time data about where you're traveling and what the risks are, so you can make informed decisions, and also gives you information about what you need to do for prevention and care, and if there's an emergency, how to respond. So the other big project that we're involved with is building tools for caregivers, patients, and their families to manage long-term care. So it's part of a project that we're involved with Brazil, a number of other universities in Canada. We've got funding from various sources, including Boeing and NSERC, etc., National Science and Engineering Research Council. And we're looking at how to support with collaborative workflow, using visual analytics, social media, and very sort of physically appropriate and comfortable natural user interfaces and interactive techniques. We are working in a test bed hospital in Brazil, way deep in Sao Paulo province, and just to give you a little bit of a sense of the environment, we're working with the Children's Care Unit. The records are all paper records, and we're in the process of helping them to really build an environment through a lot of workshops with them and training them on the use of tablets and building a visualization interface for them on a mobile platform. That, and we've built a number of different interfaces that allows both daily input of data and its analysis, and then also the ability to form teams and work really effectively across teams and use some of the ways that they already work. They do a lot of sketching there and integrate the data from sketching, photographs, video, audio recordings, and text into basically a roll-up of data that allows you to understand change within your patient load or your resident load, communicate that to families with patients or long-term care residents who are able to participate, engage them as part of the care environment. So these are some of the prototypes that we've built. This is a prototype that allows you, this is a task which is helping Martha to learn how to tie her shoes. You can ask other caregivers in the environment to help you with that task. You can have various kinds of inputs. You can represent the work that you're doing with Martha to help her with flexibility, etc. Others can come in, you can have conversations, and then this represents the sort of data profile of Martha as she and her tasks as they're developing. So this is just an example of some of the current work that we're involved with. And I want to just bring this back to my beginning statement, which is this work is very, very much about personalization and personalized health. It is so critical, again, that we understand the power of data, its analysis and representation in terms of the world ahead of us. I mean a world of aging populations where all of us want to provide better support for people in our own families and communities, and where we ourselves will need to be able to manage, understand, and represent and use our data to be healthy and engaged citizens. So it all comes back to that idea of building a personalized data profile and the ways that that environment can be effectively used in order to have better lives in the world ahead. So thank you very much.